Much like Natasha Lyonne, Piper Perabo is an actor who carried the lesbian cinematic landscape of the 2000s on her back. Now, all that's left for them to do is star in a film together where they play lovers and kiss. And the gay portal will finally open. Nice. Lost and Delirious is a film which has everything. Close-up shots of various women crying, ominous music, a baby-faced Misha Barton being subjected to her roommates partaking in sapphic arts and crafts every night, against her will, dramatic duels for the hand of a fair maiden, recitations from Shakespeare's various works, over and over and over again, Paulie looking like a homosexual heartthrob in this suit, tragic lesbian tropes galore, and most importantly, nipples, which I appreciated in a heterosexual, conservative Christian, lesbian, liberal feminist way. I mean, what's not to love? Now, I vaguely recall watching this film many years ago and not necessarily being that taken with it, but rewatching it again recently, I have to say, I feel like I now have a newfound appreciation for this film, and I feel like I now understand it on a much deeper level. Early 20s me didn't really care about anything past two women kissing. Okay. And I think Lost and Delirious is an interesting one because on the one hand, I think it's very easy to pigeonhole it to the category of reductive, tragic lesbian films. But on the other hand, when you really break the film down, it's quite intelligent and contains a lot of commentary on how deep-rooted misogyny, homophobia, and societal expectations of women drives lesbians to become these mad or tragic figures, which is really interesting to unpack and discuss. The letterbox reviews for this film, they spicy. Hi guys, welcome to a video, and in today's video we're just going to be discussing the 2001 film Lost and Delirious. I feel like this video is part review, part analysis, and part think piece, or it's just the ramblings of a mad woman. Stay tuned to find out which. If you're not familiar with Lost and Delirious, it follows a teenage girl who forms close friendships with her two older roommates after starting at an upmarket boarding school. However, when she discovers that her new friends are lovers, she finds herself caught in a complicated situation. Also, for those who don't know, this film is loosely based on the novel The Wives of Bath by Susan Swan. And I say loosely because there are quite a few creative differences between the book and the film. All I have to say is if you find this film in any way problematic, you are not going to want to read the book. That's for damn sure. Cool. Let's get into it. First of all, one of the strongest aspects of this film is undoubtedly the cast. Piper Perabo, Misha Barton, and Jessica Paré all completely embodied their characters and were 100% committed to their respective roles. You can just tell that a lot of care was taken with the casting for this film, and it paid off. Piper Perabo in particular is a standout in this film. She is just brimming with an abundance of passion, energy, and charisma all throughout it, which is fascinating to watch. And that combined with her emotional versatility really fleshed out and brought a lot of depth and nuance to the character of Paulie. Alongside this, Perabo and Paré had such a palpable chemistry and beautiful vulnerability with one another, which allowed for a truly heartfelt portrayal of an intimate, beautiful, touching, and yet devastating relationship between their characters. I mean, their scenes had me crying more than once in this film, just saying. And I thought their love scene was incredibly connective, tasteful, artistic, and just beautifully shot. You can tell that a lot of care was taken with the direction in this film, and, you know, again, it paid off. And for the most part, the cinematography, visual storytelling, and editing in this film is intelligent, and various themes, symbolism, and elements are all threaded through both the characters and the visual storytelling to create an incredibly rich and layered artistic tapestry that's fascinating to deconstruct. And looking at the themes in this film, motherhood is a very prominent one that connects the three main characters, Mary, Tori, and Paulie, as they all have either non-existent or troubled relationships with their mothers. But interestingly, motherhood is actually metaphorical for the characters' sense of self in this film. And Mary, Paulie, and Tori's identities are a reflection of their relationships to their mothers. For example, Mary Bedford starts out as a timid, lost, and repressed character, fittingly nicknamed Mouse, and we learn that her mother died of cancer and that Mary sometimes forgets what she looked like. And this forgetting is representative of Mary losing her own sense of self. Mary's character goes on a journey of growth throughout the film, which is symbolized by plant life visuals and associations. For example, the picture of Mary and her mother, which is representative of Mary's sense of self, sits inside of a frame which is covered in plant life imagery, and Mary helping out Jo with the gardening, with growing things, combined with the associations between gardening and Mary's mother, also reflects Mary's character growth and ties the metaphorical motherhood theme into that. The butterfly imagery on Mary's side of the room also symbolizes the transition that her character undertakes, from timid and uncertain to self-realized and self-assured. And this transition of self aspect of Mary's character is further underlined by her explicitly telling Jo that her own name is in transition. She is progressing from Mouse to Mary Brave, from timid to strong, which again reflects her character journey. So from all of this and Mary's experiences with Paulie, through which she learns to express herself and gain perspective, at the end of the film, Mary says that she can now always remember her mother's face, which is representative of her finally regaining her sense of self and her transition, so to speak, being complete. There is also a parallel between Mary and Paulie's characters through their association with flying creatures. And since flying is symbolic of freedom, these creatures represent how both characters are on a journey to find their freedom, albeit in different ways. Paulie finds freedom from an oppressive society by jumping to her death, or by attempting to fly alongside the falcon, and through this Mary finds her own sense of freedom and gains her metaphorical wings as a person. Then we have the character of Victoria, who is nicknamed Princess. This nickname ties into the medieval themes in the film and reflects her position in the story as the romantic prize, a position that is commonly held by the figure of the princess in fairy tales. Tori is also someone who is submissive, she seeks out social approval and wants to do right by her mother. Again, traits which are commonly associated with princess archetypes. And this causes Tori to become something she isn't. And in relation to the motherhood metaphor, we can see Tori's sense of self is shaped by her mother's expectations. Tori also ends up performing femininity, conforming to heteronormativity, and becoming trapped by the expectations of her as a woman. In a lot of ways, just like a princess in a tower. And we see how Paulie repeatedly tries to rescue her from that situation. Furthermore, interestingly, the way that Tori represses her rage against her mother mirrors her repression of self. So Tori's character is incredibly layered. And then there's Pauline, whose nickname is Paulie. And this nickname typically, although not exclusively, is a masculine one. And masculinity is a huge aspect of and theme for Paulie's character. Firstly, within the context of the film's medieval theme, Paulie represents the chivalrous hero or the figure of the prince. And we see this reflected in Paulie's character with her saving Tori from humiliation in maths class, trying to rescue Tori from the societal expectations she's been trapped by, and dueling with Jake, who is her romantic rival. Paulie is also seen wearing superhero symbols. For example, the Superman badge on her jacket and Captain America-esque shirt, both of which further reflect her position as the chivalrous hero figure. Interestingly, the Superman badge also ties into the flying theme associated with Paulie's character, and contains a layer of foreshadowing since Paulie commits suicide by jumping off of a building and attempting to fly alongside the falcon. As a side note, there's also a scene where Tori says she could give her life for blueberry pancakes, whilst the camera focuses on Paulie, which is another clue foreshadowing her suicide. So, as we can see, this film is full of small disturbing details. Anyway, Paulie also displays a lot of traits which are typically associated with men and masculinity. She is loud, she takes up space, and she's not afraid to fight. In relation to the motherhood metaphor, we learn that Paulie was separated from her birth mother and is in the process of seeking her out. And she also mentions that her adoptive mother has cold eyes and hands, which implies that she isn't really loved by her. And the rejection Paulie faces from her mothers shapes her character as one who is desperate for love and whose sense of self is tied into that. There's also a parallel established between Tori and Paulie's birth mother in this film. They are two female figures who Paulie is seeking love from. And with each rejection Paulie faces, she loses more and more of her sense of self, and eventually even attempts to shape herself into someone who she thinks could be loved by Tori. And Paulie's sense of self being tied into the love she seeks is also symbolised by her breaking a mirror in a heartbroken rage, which reflects Paulie's shattered sense of self due to losing Tori. Paulie's side of the room also contains a lot of visual clues about her character. For example, she has a Che Guevara poster, and since Che Guevara is often seen as a symbol of revolution and resistance against oppression, it reflects both the rebellious and underdog aspects of Paulie's character, and contains commentary about how she's trying to resist oppressive patriarchal and heteronormative expectations around her. Paulie is also heavily associated with a falcon, one who is having trouble with flying, and there are obvious parallels between the falcon struggling to fly and Paulie, who is existing in an oppressive environment, both being held back from their freedom. However, interestingly, the falcon can also be representative of catastrophic love, which reflects the tragic romance between Tori and Paulie, and has a history of being used to symbolise passionate courtship in medieval literature, such as La Celestina by Fernando de Rojas, which ties into the medieval theme of the film, as the falcon is a bird of prey and hunting is allegorical of courtship. The falcon is also a bold and determined bird, which reflects aspects of Paulie's character, and furthermore, the falcon ties into the Shakespearean themes of the film, as falcons or references to falcons are mentioned in both Romeo and Juliet and Macbeth, the two plays which are directly quoted and referenced in the film. So the symbolism embedded in Paulie's association with the falcon is actually incredibly layered. Lost and Delirious is also heavily influenced by Shakespeare. For example, it contains Shakespearean themes such as duels, madness, bloodshed, and forbidden love, and the recitations and excerpts of Macbeth and Romeo and Juliet in the film foreshadow a lot of the narrative, such as Paulie's suicide, which is connected to both Lady Macbeth and Romeo and Juliet, and the romance between Paulie and Tori ending in tragedy, which is obviously connected to Romeo and Juliet. There is also a further parallel between the character of Lady Macbeth, who wishes to be unsexed because she perceives her feminine qualities as weak, and Paulie, who also wishes to be unsexed due to being separated from Tori because of her sex, and who also begins to become a self-loathing woman, equating feminine qualities with weakness too. Paulie also recites lines from Twelfth Night, and in the play, these specific lines are originally spoken by the character of Viola, while she is disguised as a man named Cesario, and she is saying these lines to the character of Olivia, who believes Viola to be a man and has fallen for him / her. In the film, these lines are utilised to express Paulie's unwavering devotion to Tori, but more than that, they are also connected to the book The Wives of Bath, as in the book, the character of Paulie literally disguises herself as a man and takes on a male identity to be with Tori. Now, common criticisms of this film are that it's melodramatic, exaggerated, and that it beats the audience over the head with its symbolism, themes, and metaphors. Whilst I understand these criticisms, I have to say, it was very obvious to me that the melodrama and the, exaggerated nature of certain characters in this film is purposeful. As discussed, Lost and Delirious is heavily influenced by both medieval and Shakespearean themes. And so certain theatrical or grander elements of this film do make sense within that context, even if they do feel slightly repetitive or awkward in places. I mean, I don't think this film is flawless, and I do agree with, certain criticisms. For example, the film being overwrought in places, but I don't think the kind of melodramatic aspect is necessarily one of its shortcomings. I think it's also interesting to think about how differently certain elements of this film would be received if Paulie was a male character, because a lot of her actions, such as the repeated passionate outbursts, expressions of rage, and persistent pursuit of Tori that are deemed as exaggerated or cringy by some, actually mirror those of multitudinous male characters in media who are received much more favourably. Food for thought. Moving on, I think one of the most interesting aspects of Lost and Delirious is its portrayal of internalized homophobia. For example, Paulie is a lesbian, or at the very least, same-sex attracted. But she strongly rejects the lesbian label when Mary brings it up to her, as though it doesn't apply to her or her relationship with Tori at all. And alongside this, early on in the film, Paulie calls the headmistress a lesbo and refers to lesbianism in a mocking or amused tone, so much so that Tori has to tell her not to be homophobic. And this is interesting because Paulie's attitude towards lesbianism whilst being in a lesbian relationship suggests a cognitive dissonance that allows her to be in a same-sex relationship and yet at the same time separate herself from homosexual identity and participate in homophobia. And it's not that Paulie hates being a lesbian, it's that she's internalized society's negative view of lesbianism and is in a state of cognitive dissonance as a safety or coping mechanism. And I have to say, I think Lost and Delirious does a good job of portraying how natural and beautiful Paulie and Tori's relationship is, and that the issues between them and their respective relationship to their sexuality stems from the homophobia embedded into our society, which creates a culture of fear, self-loathing, and repression for gay people. The issues don't stem from their relationship or their sexuality. Tori's relationship to her sexuality is similar to Paulie's in the sense that she strongly rejects being, and I quote, that way. But her internalized homophobia manifests in a much more insidious way, where she frames Paulie as a predator who forced herself on her in order to avoid dealing with the social consequences, both real and imagined, of their relationship being exposed. Now, we're told and shown that Tori's family are religious conservative types who wouldn't accept a gay daughter, which explains a lot of her mindset and fears. But we also see that one of Tori's friends makes it clear to her that in her eyes, being gay is not a big deal. Yet Tori is too entrenched in her internalized homophobia to even begin to consider the possibility of owning her truth, even when given a safe space, which shows just how deep her internalized homophobia runs. It's also notable that whilst Paulie is mistreated by Tori, she dismisses the seriousness of Tori's situation with her parents, and instead of taking the time to see things from Tori's perspective, she tells her it's the 21st century and doesn't understand what the big deal is. Tori has to explain that she's in a position where she has to choose between her family's love and security and her love for Paulie, which is not an easy position to be in. And Paulie ignoring Tori's social discomfort and downplaying the severity of the consequences for Tori was hard to watch at times. And the subject of Paulie's treatment of Tori brings us on to Paulie embodying the crazy lesbian stereotype, which is one of the most interesting discussion points in this film. Firstly, I think the film does a good job in portraying how Tori chooses to conform to heteronormative expectations and is socially rewarded for it, whereas Paulie doesn't conform to those expectations and is made to feel and look crazy for it. It's understandable why Paulie behaves in the way that she does and refuses to accept the breakup with Tori, since she's been torn apart from the woman she loves due to societal homophobia, not because Tori doesn't want her. So Paulie desperately trying to hold on to Tori despite Tori's pulling away from her is understandable, even if it's uncomfortable to watch. Paulie is also dealing with being gaslit by Tori over the true nature of their relationship, as well as being framed by her as some kind of predator, both of which are deeply traumatizing. And alongside this, Paulie's a highly intelligent and sensitive individual who feels confined by heteronormativity and gender roles, and a lot of her behavior is a result of her needing an outlet for her frustrations. So from that perspective, Paulie is not crazy. She is being made to feel and look crazy by an oppressive society. However, some of the commentary that the film was trying to make about how an oppressive society can make women, and lesbians in particular, look and feel crazy is somewhat obscured by the Shakespearean theme of madness that was threaded into Paulie's character, which exacerbated her behaviour and framed her as someone who had issues that went beyond justified outlets due to the repressive environment she was in. The exaggerated nature of some of Paulie's behaviour in the film, that was largely connected to the theatrical and Shakespearean themes, is what gives her character notes of the crazy lesbian stalker stereotype. And unfortunately, that combined with the implications made in the film that her relationship with Tori was connected to the damaged relationship with her mother, diminished the progressive elements of her character quite a bit, and gave her a reductive echo of Hays Code era lesbianism. The portrayal of internalized misogyny and the messaging around how it impacts women in the film is also questionable. Now, Paulie starts out as a character who unapologetically displays masculine traits, and who has an incredibly aware and feminist mindset. And yet, after her breakup with Tori, which is related to the fact that she's a woman and not a man, she not only begins to develop internalized misogyny, but wants to physically take on the appearance of a man, or what is stereotypical to men, in an attempt to become or mimic one so that she can be with Tori. Paulie doesn't hate being a woman, she has internalized society's misogyny and heteronormative ideals and is projecting that onto herself and others. However, once again, a lot of the messaging in the film about how society teaches women and lesbians to despise themselves was somewhat obscured by the portrayal of Paulie's increasing desire to become more masculine, aligning with her declining mental health, which suggested a correlation between gender nonconformity in women and madness, which is a reductive notion, and Paulie rejecting her womanhood also feeds into the misconception that lesbians or masculine women all secretly want to be men, which ties lesbianism back to a place of heteronormativity. Also, Paulie's masculine traits, which start out as refreshing to see in a female character, such as her unapologetic expression of anger and her boldness, become amplified to the point of dangerous and unhinged, which reinforces negative associations around masculinity in women, and again obscures a lot of the messaging around how damaging oppressive gender roles and expectations of women are that the film was trying to make through Paulie's character. Now, in fairness, a lot of the writing around internalized misogyny and gender expression in the film is influenced by the book the film is based upon, and that book was written in the 90s, so some grace can be given when deconstructing the film through a current day lens. However, considering the amount of creative changes the film made from the source material, I feel like their portrayal of internalized misogyny and gender expression could have been more thoughtful, especially within the context that the film is focused on a lesbian narrative. I also think the way that internalized misogyny and issues around gender expression are portrayed in the film is again impacted by the Shakespearean themes in a way that is not necessarily complementary. As for the ending of the film, as I understood it, Paulie was freeing herself from a world that was crushing her spirit and her truth. Her jump was very much about seeking freedom from an oppressive environment through death, and this is symbolised by the flying falcon. Paulie's death also ties into the Shakespearean theme of tragedy, so I understand the creative reasoning behind Paulie taking her own life. However, at the same time, this film is already filled with reductive tropes, and the death of a lesbian character, particularly one that refuses to conform, is yet another one. And the death of a character, when well written, can be an effective way to enhance emotional impact and garner sympathy, but I think the issue is, as discussed earlier, certain themes and choices made in the film obscured the messaging around Paulie's death and anchored it to a more reductive place, which only reinforces negative associations around homosexuality. Paulie also dies in order for the straight protagonist Mary to experience growth and find herself again, which is yet another trope, and for some reason the straight protagonist growing through the tragedy of the gay character is one of the very few elements they chose to keep from the Wives of Bath novel. And it's worth noting here that Paulie didn't die in the book either. Her death was a purposeful, creative decision made for the film. I mean, I won't pretend Paulie's ending in the book is necessarily better, but again, the film had a lot of creative freedom. It was not seeking to be a faithful adaptation of the book. And I really do feel there was quite a bit of oversight and that better choices certainly could have been made. And even though within the context of certain themes and messaging in the film, I can understand the reasons behind Paulie dying, I don't personally think it was executed in the best way. Now, it's true that filmmakers don't owe anyone positive lesbian representation. People can make whatever art they like. They shouldn't be restricted by, responsibility. However, Lost and Delirious contains direct commentary on societal homophobia and lesbian experience. So within that context, you'd think there would be a little more awareness around certain tropes and also with how certain themes impacted and reshaped certain other elements in the film, such as characterization and representation and messaging around homosexuality in particular. For example, I think implementing Shakespearean themes such as madness, suicide, and tragic love in a lesbian film needs to be done with a lot of awareness and careful consideration for it to work. Because within the context of the real life history of homosexuality and also lesbian media, those Shakespearean themes create different connotations and implications when applied to lesbian characters and narratives, regardless of the initial creative intent. Too many layers on the cake, you know what I mean? Overall, Lost and Delirious is certainly one of the most interesting lesbian films to come out of the 2000s. And similar to If These Walls Could Talk To, if you haven't seen that film, go and watch it and then come and watch my review because, oh my god, I love that film, but that's another video. Anyway, similar to If These Walls Could Talk To, it's really interesting to see, in terms of the lesbian experience, what has changed from the early 2000s and what is still relevant today. I also think whilst the lesbian representation in this film isn't perfect and certain aspects could have been better thought out, it's still generally a very visually thoughtful and well-made production that's complemented by a talented cast and powerful performances, which ultimately makes it such an iconic piece of lesbian cinema. Okay guys, if you've seen Lost and Delirious, let me know your thoughts on it down in the comments section below. Don't forget to subscribe for instant disappointment, and to see you guys soon. Bye.